I'm so excited to talk about your entire career today, because I think you have accumulated a pretty remarkable body of work. And so a real pleasure to have you at New York Film
Thank you.
Festival and be talking to you.
I'm very happy to be here, and this is also an occasion for me to reflect on what I have been doing. And I had a little walk around here just before, and I remembered many things that I saw, that I encountered when I started making films, and maybe I can talk about that as well.
Well, yeah, let's get into it. So, With Hasan in Gaza is made using MiniDV footage that you shot in 2001, which was even before you made your first short film, Visit Iraq. Where were you then, like physically and figuratively? Who were you in 2001? Were you already in, you went to film school in Cologne. Were you already there, or did it even predate that?
Yeah, I was already living in Cologne. Just started my studies at the Academy of Media Arts, which wasn't a film school, it was an art school. And actually I came there by chance, because initially my plan was to go to study in France at La Femis, but I was already 26. And I went to a presentation which was led by the director of La Femis at the time in Jerusalem, where I was living back then. And I came up to him after the talk, and I told him that I would love to study cinema. And then he asked me, "How old are you?" And I said 26. And he told me, "You're too old." And then I discovered later that actually in France, there's an age limit for studying art, which is it was 27 at the time. So by chance, I met then someone who was coming from Cologne, a filmmaker, and he told me about the school in Cologne. And actually, the approach of the school in Cologne was the exact opposite. They wanted to have people already with some life experience, and I think the age beginning was 24 or 25. So it was a perfect match for me. So I went there, and I was accepted to study there. My first year there was quite frustrating, because I wanted to make films, but it was an art school. So I was enrolled in this program where actually we spent the first year basically being lost between different departments of this art school, which was the video art, the media theory, sound, and performance art. And the first year, you basically take classes from like all these different departments. And the idea was to discover through this process what you want. And of course, many of these students were getting even more lost. And so after a year, I decided to be in the film program, which wasn't really a clear film program, because it was a combination of video art and documentary, and sometimes fiction classes. But thinking about this today, I'm very thankful, because I of course I don't want to make the kind of films that people at La Femis make. And when many years later, when I became a teacher at the German Film and Television Academy, we had a cooperation with them, and we will have their students and their films. And all these films that they were making, they were so identical. And it's always about couples. It's something very French.
They do love that in France, yeah.
So I ended up making films about places, about, and in that sense, really, it shaped my my filmmaking, and it's really interesting, because what would have happened if I have went to Paris to study? I don't know. Maybe I would have made also some films about couples, but Cologne was great. So I just started studying in Cologne, and then we took this first class, which was called Video Eins. And it was the time where MiniDVs were being introduced to filmmaking. I don't know if you remember the groups like Dogma and in Scandinavia and Denmark. And my school was sponsored by Sony, so we had a lot of cameras, and almost each of the students got a camera, so we could have a camera and have it with us. And I took one back to Palestine, and then I did this trip to Gaza, and I think my idea was basically to practice what I learned. And one of the things that we learned in this class was we should try to work with this camera like we would work with 16 millimeter, where you edit in the camera, because it's kind of free way of working. It's a camcorder, you can hold it. It's like a dream of what Godard was talking at in the 70s. He wished that he had a camera that he could put in his pocket. So I went there to I did this trip, and I filmed, and I went back to Cologne, and I never actually looked at this footage. And I never saw them as well.
Why was that? Was it because, and this is maybe, I don't know if we can call it a spoiler, but the film is a quest for a person that you ultimately don't find. Was that a reason why you put it away, or?
I think we go somewhere else, and then we start a new life, right? I mean, one of the reasons why I left Palestine, I wanted to study abroad, but I wanted to leave the kind of condition that I was in as a Palestinian, where basically one is almost a ghost in our own country. And I wanted to free myself from this condition, and I wanted also to make films. So going abroad was somehow an escape from that. And in fact, it's an interesting kind of escape, because in a way, art making is an escape from life, but it is about life. And it's kind of a situation where you move somewhere else, but of course you never leave home, right? I mean, you drag everything with you wherever you go. And so I completely forgot about these tapes, and I was doing other classes, basically trying to figure out what was it that interested me in this art making. And I was learning German, so I was kind of creating a new personality. So what is for me very surprising, and I cannot explain until today, how come I never saw them? Because they were with me. I traveled a lot. I moved countries, apartments in the last 24 years, but I never saw them. I never saw these tapes. And when I discovered the tapes, it was really the exact moment. It was a year ago where I was questioning what filmmaking can do in the state of mind we're in today. What can you add? I mean, you see these images and the tremendous amount of suffering, and very tragic, and then what would you do to claim that and to make a film, which felt for me totally wrong, and something that is very painful to do. And cinema and art making really requires distance and time. So it is a total chance, or not chance, but they appear in the moment where they were needed. And now I believe that actually they were there all the time, sitting waiting to be discovered. But these tapes, the films was making itself. That's why when I discovered the tapes, right from the beginning, I watched and I thought, I cannot edit this. I should keep it as it is. And that was the concept that I pursued in making this film, was basically to keep the order of the shots the way I found it on the tapes, and treating it as a found object. And it is a found object film.
Before I go further, I do want to shout out that your editor and producer on the film, Flavia, is in the audience, and Flavia Mazzarino. So, very crucial work on the film. So, since we're talking about it, Kamal, I want to go a little even farther back. I'm curious, what kind of movies were you watching when you were younger, and what even made you want to make films? You grew up in Jaffa, yeah.
Well, I came to cinema. Pretty old, because when you start, getting interested in cinema, and you watch interviews by directors, they would tell you like, my father got me a camera when I was 9. I started making films when I was, I don't know, 5.
They're always like, my mom took me to see Sawa
Exactly.
when I was
But
10. Yeah.
This was not my case. I mean, my father took me to watch westerns. There was a cinema and because he loved westerns, and I went with him. But I, never came to my mind that I wanted to make films. And but when at some point, I developed a kind of, I would say, interest to filmmaking, because when I was studying, I studied theater in Jerusalem, and many of my friends, they had memberships to the Cinematheque, and they were going there, and I wanted just to be with these nice people, so I also made membership. And I started going and watching films, and I became much more serious than them. And so I would go and watch films, and but still, it wasn't something that I imagined making myself. I don't know at what point I realized that, there's something that I could do, which, there were kind of experiences that I have already made in my life, that I felt that image making could be the medium. But it was a very kind of vague idea, like wasn't really clear in my mind. And and then I started reading, I liked a lot going to secondhand bookstores, and there were many in Jerusalem. And I would find books, like one of the books that I came across was Interviews with Antonioni. And I didn't know who he was, and then I started looking for his films, and I was watching his films. So I was still studying theater, and I was writing my thesis about Lorca, the Spanish writer, and then and it was one play, Bodas de Sangre, that I liked a lot, and then I discovered that Carlos Saura made a film. So I went and I watched this film, and then I wrote my thesis about this film of Carlos Saura, and Bodas de Sangre by Saura. And I like this kind of transformation from the play to the stage and film, because the whole film is just on stage. You see the dancers, and one of the memories I have of this film was that the main actor dancer in the film there's before we see them performing, there is an interview with him while he's putting up the makeup in the room, and then he tells the story that he, as a young man, he went to Paris to study, and then by chance he ended up living in the same room, in the same apartment where his master lived many years ago. And there was something incredibly cinematic about this story, about fate, about coincidences. So I ended up writing my thesis about this film, and then from that point, it was really a departure for me from theater. I wasn't really interested in theater anymore. I liked reading plays, but I wasn't really into theater.
Well, the anecdote you just described of the character saying that somehow he had ended up in this house where his master had lived it really feels like something that prophesizes your approach to cinema, because I was just thinking how so many of your films, but especially your first three films, so Visit Iraq is about like an abandoned Iraqi Airways office in
Geneva.
In Geneva, right? And then The Roof is about the house that your family had to move into after the Nakba, which had this unfinished roof, and thinking about all the people who lived there and the lives that were lived there. This amazing film I just discovered in preparing for this talk, Balconies, which is shots of various balconies in Jaffa. So you have this real interest in space and in haunted places, like places and the histories they have imprinted on them or deposited in them.
You know, I think we kind of we come across things that resemble us in a way. Even the kind of people we meet, it happens a lot. Or people that we have connection with because who we are. And you know, the story of the first film that I made, Visit Iraq, was also by chance. I had at the time a girlfriend in Geneva, and I would go and visit her, take the train and go from Cologne to Geneva. And on one of these trips, I'm on my way to the train station. I see the sign of Iraqi Airways. This was in what year was it? I have to remember now. I started studying.
Film came out in 2003.
2003. So it was, I think, in the year 2000 or something like that, or later, maybe 2002 or 2001, because it took me a long time to make this film. So I saw Iraqi Airways. I thought, this is not possible, because it was already, almost 10 years of embargo against Iraq, and there was no flights going to Iraq. So I came closer to the sign, the office, and for my surprise, I see the really entire tourist kind of office of this airline, with brochures and an old black and white picture, a portrait of Saddam hanging on the wall, and old IBM computers and postcards, and it was clean, as if they were really working there. But they were not working there. Nobody was working there. Right. So I had a camera with me, so I took some pictures, and I had to take the train, so I took the train. And the following day, I went to the professor that I was studying with, Anthony Moore. He was a musician, a great, really, musician. He composed for the Pink Floyd, and he lived from this money for a long time, like for 2 songs. He was telling us all the time, you have to make the right decisions early in your life with whom you're going to work. Anyway, he was very lucky, and he was receiving all this money all the time. So I told Anthony Moore about what I saw, and I showed him the pictures, and he told me, you have to go back. you don't have to come to the class. Go back and film. Go back to and this was the kind of school I was in. I mean, all these professors, they were like artists, and they were basically encouraging us to go, film. So yeah, he gave me the paper with all the equipment that I would ask for. He signed it without me writing anything on it, and he told me you can write whatever you want. And we had this office where you would go then, and they would give you the camera. So I wrote the camera, the sound, everything, like for 2 months, like. So I went back to Geneva, and I spent there 1 month filming this office. Well, I forgot to say that when I went back, which is really totally crazy, it was like within 4 days I went back. Like after 4 days, I went back. Already the office was half empty. So I don't know what happened within these 4 days. The computers were not there. The brochures were not there. So it was already becoming abandoned, It was something very weird that happened. And I arrived there and I was so disappointed. But finally, it became a film about this absence. So I spent this 1 month there filming by myself. And I think after a week, I was taking the bus with all this equipment after a week, and I see 2 policemen waiting like this in front of the office. So I did not get off there. I sat in the cafe and I was looking at them for like maybe 2 hours. And then they left. And then I went and put the tripod and I filmed through the glass. There's not much to see. And then there was this woman who was the owner of the hotel in front of the office. She came up to me and she told me the police was looking for you. I said, why? Why the police? So I called the police. I said, why you called the police? He said, yeah, because you are filming a very bad image of Geneva. So I told her, and you never filmed me. You never came. You never came to my nice. No, it was my nice hotel. Look how nice my hotel is. Why you never talked to me? And I did an interview with her afterwards, which I never used. But she was annoyed by the fact that this man with the camera is filming that kind of dusty office and not beautiful, clean Geneva. So, yeah, it was by chance, but not by chance, because when I made the roof, it was really this, second floor, unfinished second floor of my parents' house was somehow similar.
Right.
So you kind of you are attracted to things that somehow, move you or you have connection with, and sometimes with, it's subconscious.
To get a little more specific, all your work has this interest in buildings and places, sometimes close-ups of walls, like I said, balconies, like a real interest in capturing places and the structures that people live in and around in a very material way. I'm curious where that comes from. And we see it with Hasan and Gaza too. There's a real interest in the like solid concrete things that around which people live like maybe more fragile lives.
Yeah, it comes from where I came from. I mean, this is where I grew up. This is where this was my environment. The natural environment. But I think, as I was saying before, I had a little talk and I had to think about what I was watching when I was studying at the school, and I remembered a couple of films. Like one of them was the short film by Jean Genet that he did about the prison, which was shown at class of one of the artist teachers we had, a British artist called David Larcher. that I ended up doing a lot of classes. They were not classes; they were just hanging out with him. And these films that we watch, I came across, they were always very, very minimal. And I remembered some of the titles that David Larcher gave to his films. They were kind of crazy. He didn't speak German, but he pretended to speak German sometimes, and he would invent words. So one of the titles that stayed with me was this film that he made in the early 70s. It's called View Through the Aquarium of Ich denk durch Blick. Now, the German part of the title is really he invented that language. Ich is ich, like I. Denk, tank. Sorry, not. But he wanted to say denk, which is think, but he wrote dank, which is thank you, and Durchblick, which means to see. But it's written in a way that, and the film is like that. Or another title was Video Void, video, and then void. And then he did one with his grandmother called Granny's Is. So we spent a lot of time watching his work, and he was re-editing all these films again and again. So one of the really great things about studying at this school, that when you become a student, they give you this card where you have a 24 hours access. So anytime you go to the school, there will be people there in what was called Lab 1, Lab 2, different labs. And it was a time where, people would work with the computer and, edit. It was still new, this kind of video editing. Some people were still studying with film, and very often, would go out and come very late and go to the school to hang out there, and they would see David Larcher re-editing something. He never stopped re-editing his own films. That's why there's no really track of his films, because there were so many different versions of his films. And in a way, at the time, of course, when you're a student, you think, no, this is crazy, what this person is doing. But I was attracted to that, and I ended up being in his classes. That being said, I think this kind of free way of making things, which is called actually in art schools in Germany, free art, freie Kunst, is something quite fascinating, because it means you are free to create whatever you want in any way you want. And another person that was at the school, and he worked a lot with this place limitation, was a Polish artist called Rybczynski, who made this very amazing film, pioneer film called Tango, an animation film. I don't know, maybe some of you can watch it on YouTube. It's just I think 7 or 8 minutes, and all you see in this film is a loop of people coming inside a room again and again, and the people are like their entire kind of life inside this apartment with the tango music. That's why it's called tango. And of course, when you are young, you cannot appreciate. I mean, this is always the case. So you see something, and it looks interesting. It looks fascinating, and you spend time with this person who just came from Hollywood, by the way, because he became very famous. And then, of course, many of these artists, they get hired, and then they give them one chance to make a film in Hollywood, and they fail, and then they come back to Europe and they become professors. And this was his case. And he would show us his way of working. And this limitation of one place was really something that attracted me a lot. And Anthony Moore, for example, he introduced me to the work of what's the name of this filmmaker artist who made the film London? I remember his name. Sorry? No, London. I will remember his name. Patrick Keeler. So Patrick Keeler made a lot of, like, in the tradition of English landscape films. He made a lot of films with this idea of places. So I was really introduced to all of that, and in a way, this was for me very natural. This was like my world. So when I came across this office, I already, actually, no, after Anthony told me, you should watch London by Patrick Keeler. So this is really quite amazing because, you are in a place where people, give you the right advices. And you need advices when you start. You need people to tell you, oh, you should read this book. You should watch this. And we become what we encountered, I mean, of course, we come with something within us, who we are, our life, our story. But we also connect it to other experiences, and you discover with time that your experience is like many other experiences, that there are parallels in life. And that's actually wonderful.
So it's interesting you mentioned that your professor made a film with his grandmother. I was thinking about your family appearing, especially in the earlier films, The Roof, but also Port of Memory, a really beautiful film, which I think features members of your family as well. What did that mean to you to have your family be part of your films? I mean, I wonder, was it just like they were there, or was there a sense of, I don't know, documenting their stories?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, one of the films that somehow encouraged me to work with my family was the first film of Elias Suleiman, Chronicle of Disappearance. I don't know if any of you seen this film. And it was actually a kind of a discovery, because it was first a Palestinian film. So and he worked with his family, his father, his mom, and his neighbors, and he made a wonderful film, an amazingly cinematic film, and this made me think, oh, I could work with my family. I could, because many times when you watch films and when you study, you not necessarily you think about your family, and you want to film others, and in my case it has been always the case that I wanted to make films about personal films, but this film encouraged me a lot, because I could see similarities. So one of the, if you know the film, one of the final scenes of Chronicle of Disappearance is the parents of Elias Suleiman falling asleep in front of the TV, which actually is something that I've seen, my father doing. So, of course, it's always different. The setting is different, but the essence is the same, which was really the daily life of people, which for me was a fascinating subject. So a scene of people watching TV is really incredibly cinematic, because what happens when you watch TV is somehow the setting, it's very universal. I mean, all people watch TV. The kind of sound that comes from the TV, the music, the feeling, it transforms itself to the people. And when I shot Port of Memory, and I had a long argument about that with the sound person that I worked with, I told him that I want to film with the sound coming from the TV, and he told me you are crazy because you cannot edit that afterwards, right? Because you need to have the option to have a different sound. If someone talks, then you cannot edit. And I told him I don't want anyone to talk. And then we filmed just, my mother, my sisters, my father watching the TV, and then there are many scenes in the film where things happening with the TV on. And this became somehow the soundtrack of the film, like all this like musical elements that, somehow it does much better job than you would do as a filmmaker to choose like the music. There's something kind of magical in the sound, in the moment, what comes suddenly
it's like
on
the
TV.
Soundtrack of daily life also. For many people,
Totally.
it's like the TV. Yeah.
And I find that fascinating, and it's something that was for me quite interesting to work with. And I did that with The Roof, and then again with Port of Memory. But it was also the life of my family, like I have an aunt that was making kind of a flower, how would you call that, the for the wedding,
like arrangements.
Yeah, flower arrangements. And this was for me so surprising, there was a channel on TV, a wedding channel, and she would watch this wedding channel and make this flower arrangements. So I in Port of Memory, I filmed her making the flowers, and she's watching all the time. There's people, and she never married. And she did this work, and then the whole day she was watching these like weddings on TV. Listen, imagine there's a channel broadcasting weddings 24 hours. So this was there, it's not something that I invented. And I don't think most of the time we don't invent things, we are there to capture, to collect. And I at some point, I understood that being a filmmaker is being a collector.
That's so well said, and I want to come to like your archive fever, so to speak. But because you mentioned daily life, and that's such a big part of your films too, capturing quotidian life. And there was a beautiful piece in Film Comment, just we published a few days ago, where Karim Estefan wrote about With Hasan in Gaza, and he said, and I'm quoting, "Rarely in cinema is Gaza granted the care of close, tender observation that seeks to know the place from the perspective of a neighbor and friend rather than a journalist or emergency worker. With Hasan in Gaza is poignant not only because it depicts Gaza before its annihilation, but because Aljafari explores its life worlds with a loving curiosity that has nothing to do with saving it or speaking on its behalf." Which I thought like really distilled your approach, this kind of neighborly or familial curiosity, but your real interest in the rituals of daily life.
Yeah, I'm quite fascinated by daily life activity. I mean, when I made my first film, The Roof, and then the second, Port of Memory, and I most of the scenes is with my family. It's just the daily life. It's in Port of Memory, you see my aunt making the bed. And the way she would do things, they were very, very, very beautiful. Like no actress would ever do the bed like she does. And this made me somehow, remember what I was when I was studying in Cologne. We took some classes with films of Robert Bresson, and I read his book Notes for the Cinematographer, and I was fascinating at some point with this idea of we as human beings, we are automatic. we do things. We do the same things again and again. And if you start observing that in the household setting, I mean, you can see that is so true. And this kind of rituals of life, I mean, of course, it was very particular with, like, in Port of Memory with my aunt, the way she washes her hand. It was almost like a dance. And all it requires from you as a filmmaker is to pay attention. And there are people around you, you know, like all the time, and they're doing things in a certain way, and they're unique. And I find it much more interesting than working with like making a fiction film where you tell people what to do. And one of the things that early on I you know, one of the early readings I did with Antonioni, and he was asked a lot about what is directing, and he would say, I don't know what is directing. But then he said, yeah, I don't ever show the people how to do things. And just this sentence alone guided me a lot when I made The Roof, because you know, the roof, you see, you know, I would tell my mother, stand at the window and look at the window, and my mother would ask me how. I said, just do it like the way you do it. Because the moment you start showing people how to do things, it's not natural, and it's not real anymore. It becomes something else. Now, of course, you know, you know, luckily my family is very cinematic. Like, quickly they played the role, and it was really simple kind of ideas I had, or things I read, combination. It's always a combination, you know, like there's nothing that you invent entirely, you know, like you read something, you come across something, and then there's something within you that you combine together. And it was really these two ideas that I worked with, is never to do the thing that I'm asking them to do, and also never to ask them to do something that they usually do not do. And this is where, in fact, this limitation of kind of communication, you know, with the people that you love, right? I mean, why you film certain the people, why you are framing, you know, there's something that you love, you want to capture, and these two kind of rules, if you want, they were for me enough to make a film.
Did you have a sense like that this was politically sort of different and important? I mean, what struck me about Karim's description of, you know, he says that's not a Gaza we get to see on screen often. And so in that moment, did it feel like you were doing something different by capturing these kinds of intimate daily moments of the lives of Palestinians, or is that just something that, you know, comes after maybe?
I think I was just simply touched by what I was seeing, and I had this camera with me, and I was filming all the time, and you know, I cannot really recall exactly the feeling I had, because I don't even remember having shot most of it.
Right.
So, but I can yeah, somehow imagine that at the time when I filmed it, and it was 24 years ago, and the way it is filmed, you know, it's like seeing the work of someone else in a way, because I truly don't remember most of the shots. The only scene that I remember having shot was the one at Hasan's house, where you know, where we are at the window, and there's the basketball game. And then I remembered as well that I slept at his children's room, because they were away with their mother. I think, looking at what I filmed, I think I was very curious, and I somehow was very touched about what I was seeing. And something that comes across a lot in this footage was the people that never get tired of showing you and wanting you to see their condition. So most of the time in the film, people they are telling me to film something, or they were guiding me. They were actually directing me. So I would just follow. And I think I was just touched by what I was seeing, and everything that you see in front of you, if you give it the right attention, it becomes what people would later call cinema. But at the beginning, there's no such a thing. I mean, it's just life, and the camera as an apparatus, that is between you and the subject matter. If you treat it in the way that I treated it in this journey that I did, by filming all the time, without having in mind a film to make, it was just a kind of exercise that I did. And putting your full attention to the people. It's about the attention, like to be alert all the time, and to film in curiosity. That of course, when we make more films, we lose it. We are less and less curious. The older we get, that we become less curious, I think. We have to train ourselves again.
So like I said, I want to talk about your interest in archives. So from, I think, Recollection, which was in 2015 onwards, you worked a lot with found footage, which takes various forms. With Recollection, it was footage from, I think, Israeli fiction films of Jaffa. And then you've also made films like a Fidai film from last year was with footage that was looted from the Palestinian Research Center in Beirut by Israeli forces and is kind of inaccessible, and you sort of patched it together. And then also more personal kinds of found objects, like the surveillance camera footage that your dad had from his yard in Ramla. When did you start getting interested in found objects, archival materials, working with those, and why?
I never thought that I would be making films with someone else's material or found footage. It really came maybe by chance. But at the beginning of that was when I made Pot of Memory. It was such a difficult production process. We filmed on 60 millimeter. We were filming in Palestine. We had to ship it to Germany. There were so many problems, and making the film, raising the money. After making this film, it was so exhausting to make films. And then I applied for a fellowship to go to. I got this Radcliffe, Harvard fellowship, which I was very happy about, and and then I still wanted to do things, right? And I was showing Pot of Memory, and there was this festival in London, and they invited me to show the film. It's a real story. And I checked into my hotel room, and at the time, I don't know, they don't do it anymore in like hotels. You would have this welcoming message on the TV. Welcome, Mr. Aljafari, or something. So, you go in, of course, the first thing you would do, you change the channel. So I changed the channel, and then I went to take a shower. I came out of the shower. There was a film playing on TV, and this was Delta Force starring Chuck Norris. And this was the exact scene that I saw when I was a child in Jaffa. I saw them filming that.
Oh, okay. You actually saw the production.
I saw the production because when I was watching the TV, I recognized the scene, but I did not see this film before. I sat and I watched this film for the first time. And Delta Force was a film that was shot in Jaffa as Beirut during the Civil War. I think it was shot in 83 or 84, starring Chuck Norris. It's a typical kind of yeah, American propaganda film of the Delta Force coming to free some hostages kept by Arab terrorists. You know, they speak like very strange language because actually the actors were not Arabs. They were Mizrahi Jews that spoke very strange Arabic. It was almost like a comedy when you watch it. But I was watching, and all the time I was waiting for the actors to leave the frame because I could see the streets of my childhood that then changed a lot. You know, destroyed or, you know, gentrified, etc. And this is where I got this idea I should make a film with the background of fiction films that were shot in Jaffa. And I started collecting these films. I discovered there were many, many of them. And this is where I made this film that was, you know, called Recollection. Basically collecting all of this fiction, Israeli and some American films that were set in Jaffa as early as the 60s until the late 80s. And there were many of these films. And basically, the idea was to make a film with the backgrounds of these films where, you know, one can visit all these places. And this is where I started, you know, working with the found footage.
Found material, yeah.
But I actually never. And then people would tell me, "Oh, your film is like this LA film. What's the title? There's this film that was made about all these places that appeared in films in LA. Playing itself.
LA plays itself, yeah.
And people would then tell me, "Oh, you should watch this film." You know, and it's really interesting because when you go to festivals, you know, and you meet people, and people tell you the most incredible things. You know, like to have a person outside waiting for you to tell you, "Oh, you should read this book." And it happened to me recently. You know, I was showing something in Paris, and then someone came up to me and told me, "You know, what you told me now reminded me of a book written by a Turkish writer that was in prison that said once that you don't have to look for stories. You have to look for the people that will tell you the stories." So people tell you things, and, you know, like, it's kind of incredible because yeah, people are curious, and they share with you their passion or what they came across, and this book that this person told me about is so beautiful, and what he told me is so true. And maybe I did not think about my work in this way, but after he told me, I thought, yeah, this is true. Like, you don't look for the stories. You look for you find the people, you find the places. I mean, they come to you. So, what was the question?
No, you answered it. Just like how you came to have this interest in archives.
It was really, and then after making this film, I discovered when I started work. At first, actually, my idea was not to make a film because I had this idea of becoming an artist and not a filmmaker, because I thought it's filmmaking is so difficult. So I was more and more interested now. I should make films like artists, like in galleries and stuff like that, because for me it looked like it's always shorter, less complicated. So the process of making Recollection started with the idea of making a photographic project, which I called at the time Not Without Me. Because all of these films that I was gathering, they were Israeli and American films shot in Jaffa, but you don't see Palestinians. They don't exist. They are not in the narrative. They are also not extras. So they are like uprooted for the second time. And that's why I came up with this idea. I want to make a photographic project with the title Not Without Me. And this was collecting these films and then projecting them in a cinema, and then practicing my work as a photographer, taking snapshots of details that appeared in the background of these films, like places. And, you know, I discovered, it's crazy what I discovered. You know, like, the corner where I used to sit with my grandfather appeared in one film in the 80s. Um, and I had memories of this corner because it had a very like a special sand stone that was typical for houses in Jaffa. So I saw it in a film. So I took a picture of the stone. And then in one film there was this car, a blue car. Then I showed this picture to my mother, and then she told me this is the car of a relative of hers. And then she told me, yeah, he used to be a taxi driver, and we used to take this car to go to Gaza to visit our relatives. But this is, you know, it's so crazy because I took this picture. I knew that this is the corner of my grandparents' house, but I didn't know about this car. But when my mother saw the postcard, she told me the story. So I would have never heard the story if I didn't make this photo and show it to her. And then she told me that this is what becomes later the end credits of Recollection. All these stories that you know I collected, said by, you know, that were told by people when I showed them the images. Now what I discovered in the process, and this is always interesting when you practice, when you do things, you start with an idea and it becomes something else. So my first idea was just to take pictures of places. But then in the process, I started seeing all these people that actually were not part of the narrative of the films. They were just passing by or looking out of the window while the shooting was happening. And one of them, even my uncle that passed by in the background of one of the films. So I started taking pictures of all these people that appeared in the background. And later on, I made this film, which is basically about the place and the people who smuggle themselves into the image. These the Palestinian characters that were excluded completely from the narrative of the films, they existed always there. And you know, in the process of making this film, I started believing they have been waiting for me there all these years to make a film with them. This was the premise of the film.
That's so beautiful, and I think that relates to something you've said a lot about your found footage and archival films. You have this idea of the camera of the dispossessed, and how it challenges what you call a cinematic occupation. Can you talk about what that means to you, the camera of the dispossessed, and you know what that means to your filmmaking?
Yeah, I came up with this idea while I was working with the footage that I found for a Fidai film, which was mostly a project that started with an idea of making a film with looted materials. I mean, for you that they don't know the story, that in 1982, when the Israeli army invaded Lebanon and occupied West Beirut, they invaded the city, and then they looted many institutions. And one of them was the Palestine Research Center, which was a very serious institution in Beirut, founded in 1966 by Anis Sayer, who was a Palestinian researcher, intellectual, that had an idea of creating a kind of archive and research center where films, maps, books are being collected to kind of create a place, an archive about Palestine. And it was actually encouraged by at the time the PLO. It was a PLO academic project. They had different kind of projects. One of them was the Palestine Research Center, and so this place was entirely looted. You know, taking the entire library of this center, the many maps that they were collecting, and films, because many of these PLO political organizations, they had their own film units, and everything was there in this center. Also, the archives of the UNRWA. So when people today, when you hear in the news, the accusations made, UNRWA is a terrorist organization. This is already like back in the 80s. Already, the work of the UN was being, in this case, was being looted by the army, and the entire archive. And actually, the UNRWA gave the Palestine Research Center their entire archive because of the invasion, the Israeli invasion of Beirut. So they left the city and they gave their archive to the Palestine Research Center. Anyway, everything was taken, and in the film, if you watch it, there is a clip there from that was made for the Israeli TV, but wasn't broadcasted, that I found, where you see the army taking the books and taking things from this place. So I had this idea of making a film only with this looted material, like creating a narrative, but I realized quickly, it was not so easy to find things, and that I should collect more archives. And then I started taking different materials from Israeli archives, like fiction and documentary that were filmed by Israelis as early as the 30s in Palestine. Before there were no Israelis, but kind of Zionist different groups that would come there, or even missionaries that came to Palestine. And Palestine is really a very particular case in relation to cinema, because it's a place that was filmed a lot. So the Lumiere brothers, one of the places that they went to was Palestine. They went there and they filmed their iconic shot, the arrival of the train. There's one like that that was made in Jaffa. Anyway, so I would because of COVID, many of these Israeli institutions, they decided to create these online portals. So the people the researchers and people can watch. They couldn't go anymore to the museums. And I discovered that early on, and I started recording my screen and collecting. For 2 years during COVID time, I created my own archive out of their archives. And then Flavia came in, and she became also an archivist, and we recorded like endless. So we had like, I don't know how many archives we have. We don't know how many. And it's a kind of thing that you see something and you have a feeling, I have to have this. And you don't know what you're gonna do with it. But later on, 2 years, 3 years later, you develop an idea for something. Anyway, so the film became a combination of both. But actually, I ended up making this film because of COVID. Because I had in mind another project I wanted to make, but you could not film, you could not do anything. So I ended up making this film. So in a way, things happen for a reason, like why you do things. And then in the case of Unusual Summer was the discovery of this VHS tapes that, my father installed a surveillance camera because someone used to break his car. And he filmed the car for one, like it happened many times, and he was fixing the window all the time, and then he got this. It was really interesting what he did, because he got this camera that he connected to a VHS recorder, and basically he started recording everything. And then I discovered these tapes. There were many of them, and I started watching, and I was so fascinated by this material because the way he framed was so incredible, because he framed in a way that everybody who passes by the car, passes the street, you will know where he came from, where he went to. So you have in one corner really the entire life of the neighborhood. So I was watching, and it was really fascinating by everything that this camera filmed, because yes, there was the idea behind it of finding out who was breaking the car window. But then the camera filmed everybody. It filmed the daily life of my family from the house to the car, and the neighbors. And you know, I started making this film with an idea of you know, finding who did it, right? And then I became a kind of detective, you know, taking notes of everything that passes by this car. And I became so obsessive with that because it was fascinating. Like everything that passes, you know, people pass by the car. You see all this. I see all these characters that I knew from my childhood. You know, like if you see in the film, you will see it. You know, there are these two sisters that I knew from my childhood that I actually never saw them apart. The twin sisters. They always walk together. And on this material, on the camera, you see them all the time walking. And then there was this man, for example, that every time he passes by the car, he would just touch it. So in my work as a detective in this case, you know, I was taking notes of everything. I would make him a suspicious, right? A suspect. So the film became about that, you know, like about daily life again.
Yeah.
You know, about characters. And it's like incredible because, you know, when people make film, like when you make films, you cast, right? I mean, what people call casting, and then you choose a certain character. But this camera, that's why, you know, one of the notes that I use, you know, on my camera, on my father's camera, everybody has a chance. Everybody has a chance to exist. And, you know, this camera has such a patience that no filmmaker has. It's the best camera, it's the best director. So I started working with these ideas, and it was like endless. What the stories that this camera was collecting and characters that this camera was collecting was really endless and so poetic. You know, the daily life is incredibly poetic. And yes, it was shot in Palestine, but it could be also somewhere else, any place in the world.
I think, I don't know, do we have time for a couple audience questions, or are we? No, okay, we're out of time.
Okay.
So we have to end there, but maybe Kamal, you could entertain some questions
Yeah.
in the lobby.
In the lobby. Ah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So maybe we can take the conversation out of this room. But thank you, Kamal. That was such a wonderful.
Thank you.
A beautiful deep dive into your filmography, and I hope it's inspiring people to seek out more of his work.
Thank you.
Thank you.